Welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to unpack the absolutely fascinating evolution of a character who has just completely permeated Western culture. I'm talking, of course, about the familiar, swashbuckling hero of Nottinghamshire. We all think we know the story of Robin Hood, right? You know, the brilliant archer, the charming rogue in the forest, the champion of the downtrodden who has somehow survived dozens of questionable Hollywood movie accents. But the actual truth behind how this legendary archetype was built up over the centuries is way more complex, and frankly, a whole lot more interesting than the folklore we all grew up with.
So, it's the very first thing everyone wants to know when we talk about this legend. Was Robin Hood actually a real person? Well, historical records offer absolutely no definitive proof of just a single man. Actually, scratch that. It's more like historians suggest he's a composite. The character draws this deep inspiration from various medieval outlaws, poachers, and dissident figures who roamed the forest of medieval England. So he isn't just one guy. He's an amalgamation of many real people who lived on the absolute fringes of society.
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1. Origins of a Yeoman, a violent outlaw. If we look back at the really gritty 13th century legal records and rhyming narratives, the very earliest mentions of a figure named Robin Hood do not show a shining, noble hero. No, they show a rugged and sometimes highly violent yeoman outlaw. And to really get why this rugged figure resonated so much with everyday people, we've got to look at the environment he operated in, specifically the forest laws. Now, these were incredibly harsh medieval regulations, strictly designed to protect the king's deer and his royal hunting grounds. To put that into perspective, for the rural poor, poaching wasn't some casual sport, it was an absolute necessity, literally just to survive. But these laws turned that basic survival tactic into a hugely serious crime. Because of this incredibly strict and honestly often corrupt enforcement, the early Robin Hood became a vital symbol of raw resistance against a totally unjust system.
Moving on to a slightly lighter notes. Section 2. The Merrymen. Sherwood Forest.
As we move into the late medieval period, ballads started really romanticizing our rugged outlaw. They gave him a strict honor code, a lush refuge deep beneath the canopy of Sherwood Forest, and, perhaps most importantly, some famous company. We're talking Little John, Friar Tuck, and Maid Marian. What is absolutely brilliant to see here is the emergence of this iconic supporting cast. These characters weren't just thrown in for entertainment. Sure, Friar Tuck was essentially a medieval bouncer, but each of them added really crucial layers of morality and structure to the outlaw band. They basically transformed Robin Hood from a solitary rogue into the leader of a principled community, living out their own sense of justice out in the wild.
Which brings us to Section 3, the aristocratic PR makeover, the 16th century. Fast forward to the 16th century and Robin Hood undergoes what we can only call a massive revisionist history campaign. The powers that be really needed to make this anti-establishment outlaw palatable to the upper classes and the nobility. They couldn't exactly celebrate a common criminal who routinely defied the authorities, right? So they completely rewrote his background. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the stark contrast of this PR makeover. On the left, we've got our original 13th century rugged, violent yeoman, but on the right, look at this. He is suddenly gentrified into the noble Earl of Huntingdon. This was a very deliberate move. By casting him as a dispossessed aristocrat instead of a commoner, the story suddenly became totally acceptable for high society to enjoy. He wasn't a peasant fighting the lords anymore, he was a lord who had just been temporarily wronged.
And because his background changed, well, his motivations had to change too. This newly minted noble outlaw was now framed as fighting a moral insurgency. His goal was specifically to reclaim his rightful title and stolen estates from very specific corrupt institutional figures, namely the villainous Sheriff of Nottingham and the corrupt Prince John. By giving the villains a face and a really specific political context, the story neatly justified Robin Hood's actions without actually threatening the overall social order. It was these very same 16th century adaptations that ultimately solidified his famous ethos to rob from the rich and give to the poor. This iconic quote became the absolute bedrock of the legend moving forward. It perfectly framed his band as moral insurgents fighting for true justice in a system that was fundamentally rigged against the common folk. It gave his outlaw actions a sense of profound, undeniable righteousness. Let's look at Section 4, Adapting Through the Ages, a Mirror for Society. It's fascinating how this character has been endlessly rewritten over the centuries to reflect the specific social and political anxieties of the times. Just walk through this timeline with me. We start in the 13th century with the rugged outlaw, a symbol of rural survival. Then, the 16th century rolls around and turns him into the noble earl just to appease the aristocracy. By the Victorian era, society really valued high morals, so he was portrayed as this highly chivalrous defender of the weak. And then in the 20th century, cinema totally reimagined him as a swashbuckling revolutionary hero, fighting back against fascist-leaning tyrants. But through all these incredible shifts, the underlying constant remains exactly the same: a man who challenges the boundaries of law and finds absolute freedom out in the wild.
And that leads us right into Section 5, the ultimate everyman, the legend of Nottingham. Why does this constantly shifting legend remain so enduringly popular with us today?
Whether he's depicted as a political rebel, a folk hero, or a romantic lead, his supreme relatability stems directly from his traits. So the crucial point is there's no magic, no divine intervention, just wit, incredible skill with a longbow, and the unwavering loyalty of his band of brothers. He completely lacks superpowers. He just exists on the margins of society, relying entirely on his own human skills and the community he builds around him. And that right there is what makes him an enduring symbol of defiance that anyone can aspire to.
Which leaves us with this final, really important thought to ponder. Robin Hood remains a permanent reminder of the power of the individual to stand against the overwhelming weight of institutional corruption. So, I want to leave you with this provocative question. If his true power is standing up to rigged systems, who is the Sheriff of Nottingham today? Where do we see that same institutional corruption, and what does it look like for the everyday person to stand up to modern tyranny from the margins of society? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this gives you a whole new perspective the next time you hear the name Robin Hood.